Mic check. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 2023. It's 7 p.m. I will call the Village Board and Plan Commission meeting to order with the Pledge of Allegiance and a standing moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Roll call and open meeting law compliance check. Present. Present.
Commissioner Rinaldi,
Present.
Commissioner Novak,
Present.
Plan Commission is all here. President Fortner,
Present.
Trustee Slamy,
Present.
Trustee Newman,
Present.
Trustee Nashik,
Present.
Trustee DeGrave is not here and will be here towards the end of the meeting.
Thank you. And also here is our planner, Sean Malarkey, and some members of by the Vernon Village Board and Plan Commission will be held on Wednesday, January 11th, 2023 at 7 p.m. at the Village of Vernon Hall located at W249 S8910 Center Drive to take comments on zoning ordinance amendments, to Chapter 300, petition by the Village of Vernon. The notice was published by Brad Calder, our Clerk Administrator, Village of Vernon, W249S8910 Center Drive, Vernon, Wisconsin, 53103. Phone 262-662-2039. Email clerk@villageofvernon.wi.org. Or to view the information, go to the Village of Vernon's website, www.villageofvernon.wi.org. For questions, comments, or copies of the proposed zoning amendments for the Village of Vernon, please contact the administrator. All parties will be heard. As an initial matter, as I understand it, there's some questions regarding what exactly was posted as far as the zoning code amendments on the village's website. We had various drafts going and changes made at our last Plan Commission meeting. And we will talk about this as a board to, at the end of this public hearing, do not close it, but to adjourn it to the February Plan Commission meeting so that the appropriate zoning code amendments are posted on our website and available to the public. So more on that later. I thought the better approach, because people have come today to make public comments, that we would take public comments and adjourn rather than just adjourn and shift everybody to February. So Sean, the way we're going to do this for the public, we'll have Sean, the planner, he'll give us a report. We'll go right into public comments and questions. We'll take Plan Commission members' comments and questions, Village Board members' comments and questions, and final comments, and members of the public if they want to have comments on information that they might have heard since their initial public comments were made. They'll have the opportunity to come up and make those comments. And like I say, whether we close it or not, it'll be a board decision at this point. Given the various drafts and what was posted on the website, I think I'm leaning toward adjourning the public hearing so it would keep it open till February. And then at that point, we would not be taking up discussion and possible action. But with that, we'll turn it over to Sean, and he can kind of fill the public in on this process. I know we've been working on it for better part of a year.
Yeah, it's actually been a year. We started in January of 2022, so it has been a year process. We've looked at the zoning ordinance carefully. When we started, we had a certain list of tasks we wanted to accomplish for the zoning ordinance, and we did achieve those, and we looked at those carefully. But we had along the way, as people pointed things out or found things that they wanted to update. We did add those in as well, but they weren't necessarily very extensive. So just an overview of what we did accomplish in the zoning ordinance over the past year. We obviously went through and changed everything in the ordinance from town to village. So anything that had to do with the town, we changed to village. Anything that had to do with county oversight of the zoning process got removed from the ordinance, since we are obviously a village under our own zoning here. We made extensive changes to the signage portion of the ordinance. We'd found through using it that what's existing today was inadequate in terms of signage regulations and size of signage, et cetera. So we spent a good deal of time looking at signage. We made changes to legal nonconforming uses in terms of required statutory updates. The same thing with zoning variances regarding statutory updates, and differences between area variances and use variances is outlined now in the ordinance as the statutes require. Before we became a village, and before we had our own zoning ordinance, which even preceded Vernon becoming a village, we had certain regulations in different sections of the ordinance that weren't in the zoning. For instance, Chapter 125 is our accessory building section, and so we had a lot of information on accessory buildings and structures that were in there so we could regulate them outside of zoning. But now, since we have our own ordinance, we're a village, we brought all that over from Chapter 125 into the zoning ordinance. And the same thing with Chapter 144 for the commercial and industrial development standards. Those were in there as a way to regulate. Those were really our main focus for doing the zoning updates. And then we had other amendments along the way, including some of the definitions got updated. We added provisions for allowing a second residence on the property when one already exists, with the intent where the owner is going to create a new house and then eventually tear the old one down. So there's protections in there for removal of the original house and posting of bonds and that sort of thing. So that's in there now to allow people to do that. We significantly updated the home occupation standards. We took a look at some of the parking standards and added some flexibility in there in terms of commercial and other parking standards for the planning commission to use some discretion. We added back in legal nonconforming uses as a conditional use, so that if something is legal nonconforming today, meaning it's out there, it doesn't meet the requirements of the ordinance, but at one time it was legal, that now we can make that a conditional use, and thereby doing that can expand it if we want to, if it's a use that fits in with where it's located. So that got changed. We added exterior lighting standards mostly for commercial development. And then the last thing we really did is, after the Plan Commission recommended it to go to the board for review, we brought it back because we noticed that there were some changes to the rezoning process and the text amendment process that needed to be updated. So right now, as it stands, the current draft, it basically requires a joint public hearing between the Plan Commission and board for any zoning amendment changes, any zoning text changes, which is the same process we use for conditional uses, and so on. So we did make a couple of very minor changes to the use matrix, the appendix table that basically says what uses are allowed in which districts, but that was, again, very minor. So that's really the extent of the changes. If there's specific questions, be happy to answer them. There was one thing that came up at our last meeting. I think Commissioner Nowak brought it up with regard to one of the sections in the ordinance related to dilapidated buildings and so on. It's section, and we haven't made any changes to this, and I guess my task was to talk to the building inspector to get his take on it, which I did. Essentially, section 300-8F under use regulations in the code says, For any use or structure in any district which becomes hazardous, harmful, noxious, offensive, or a nuisance to the surrounding neighborhood, the owner or occupant may be required to correct, improve, or abate such conditions by such measures as may be mutually directed by the Plan Commission and Board, consistent with reasonable technology and economic practicality and in conformance with reasonable standards, as may be determined by the Plan Commission and the Board, as may be contained in this code and all other applicable ordinances. Any building determined to be unfit for human habitation or which may endanger health, safety, and welfare of the public, as may be determined by the board or after recommendation by the Plan Commission, shall be removed pursuant to the procedures outlined by the Wisconsin statutes. And I think the question was, well, why does the building inspector need to get basically recommendation from the Plan Commission, approval by the board to make those determinations and do those things? And so I talked to our building inspector about it, and his opinion basically, his email says to me, in all my communities, different communities that he works, any demolition orders must be approved by at least the board based on a report from my department as part of a compliant procedure. Because the raise action, it sometimes may require a court order, and in the event of noncompliance, the community may have to raise the structure itself and pass the cost on to the owner. So he was pretty clear that definitely anything that had to be raised needed some sort of approval from the Plan Commission and the board.
Yeah, the question I had was that it states the village board and the plant commission to make that determination.
Right. He said at least the board. It's going to
Doesn't
be
even involve the building inspector. But
right. So he's saying it definitely should be. He's open to have it changed to be building inspector after approval by the board for raising anything else in terms of improving conditions and so on can be building inspector only. So if that's a change that we want to make for next time around, I certainly can work with him to get the language correct on that.
Well, if we have the plan commission in there, we're just gonna take the word of a building inspector and pass it on to the board without going out and looking at it.
Right.
We're not really making a determination, I guess, but.
Sure. So as we know, we're now going to be adjourning this to February, so I can, the next go around, we can include that tuned up language.
Okay, so we'll go to public comments. Somebody had their hand up. There is a sign-in sheet. We can go off the sign-in sheet. There's very few people here. We can raise hands and come up, whichever way we want to do it. What you need to do is get close to the microphone, please. The green light's on. If you could, state your name and address and provide your public comments.
David Bigelow, West 250, South 2475, Center Drive. I am wondering what brings this to light. What is the goal of this avenue? I'm curious to why this is being started.
Well, I guess I'll start off and you guys can chime in as well. I mean, this was something we've been talking about for probably a couple of years. As zoning ordinances are written, and ours was written, I don't remember, is maybe 6-7 years ago this got put into place. We used to be under county zoning, now we had our own town zoning, and now we're a village. It was put in place, and no zoning ordinance is perfect. You basically, as you use it and work with it, for certain communities, you find that there's issues and things don't quite work right or fit. So this was our attempt to go through the ordinance and fix the things that we thought weren't working correctly for the village. And some of the not protections, but some of the changes here were based just on statutory changes. As I mentioned, there's changes to the statutes for legal nonconforming uses and variances, and so those got made for statutory purposes. But we tuned it up because we thought it could work better, and we think these changes can help.
May I ask, towards what purpose?
To improving all the sections that I outlined. Maybe I'm not following what the question is. So for instance, we looked at signage. That was one of the things that we really spent some time on. And so in my experience here, I've been the planner for, I think it's 5 or 6 years, and we don't have a lot of commercial development, but some of the commercial development we do has signage proposed with it, and we found that the standards that were in the code didn't give us the signage that we wanted. It was, for one, it was way too small. And so one particular development came forward, and they wanted to do this pretty cool sign with some internal lit lighting, very tasteful, but we told them they couldn't, the size was too big, and they had to go to this tiny little sign that our ordinance allowed. And they said, well, okay, in that case, we're not going to spend the money to do it this way because it's too small. And we just found that it didn't make any sense. So the purpose was to improve it, to get better development and basically, better context for the community. So that's my opinion on it. That's my take. When we started the process, we listed all the things basically we thought could be tuned up, because as we've been working it, and that got approved. The Plan Commission okayed it. We ran it by the board. They okayed looking at these things. So again, it's something we've been talking about for about 2 years. Started it a year ago, and it's just wrapping up now. Anybody else?
Yeah, I would concur with that. Signage is one. The lighting standards were ambiguous substandard. We improved those, I think, Sean, right? And landscaping.
We did.
Same thing with landscaping was deficient, so we improved those. We had
Home occupations, we spent a
home
good deal of time on.
occupations. We spent some time on that because people were working from home, and
Well,
that needed to be
that's
that
been
needed to be
pretty
up to
common recently.
right.
And they still
people
can. They still can,
and
but-
they still can. And we made sure that could continue. We had I can't remember how many people who wanted to tear down their existing homes in Vernon, and rebuild, and so that wasn't permitted under our zoning, and so that was changed because, it seems to me if someone wants to do a tear down and rebuild, why can't they do? I mean, they should be permitted to do that.
To be able to live in the house that they're going to tear
To
down
live in their
eventually if
house,
they
and
build
so they
a
can
new
have a second house. The thing is, the zoning says only one house. Well, if they're building another one, now they have two, but they want to live in their existing one, why they build, and then they're going to tear down the existing one. So that kind of changed. So we were trying to, as Sean said, tune it up, and of course, the move town to village, that was in the legal non-conforming variances. Those are legal issues. We moved accessory buildings from our general code because we were out, we're in county zoning, and the same way with commercial standards, that's chapter 144 into zoning. So those weren't changed all that much, but they were moved over. So we cleaned it up too. To
Thank
put
you
the
for your
zoning-
clarification.
To put the zoning all in together. So there's a combination of things. The board authorized the Plan Commission and to hire Sean to walk us through, and we've had various meetings, it's been on the agenda. So that's kind of the nutshell on that. So hopefully that helps.
It did, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, are you doing by show of hands? We've got 5 people, or I don't know who else signed up on the sheet. Raise your hand and come up for public comments. Mr. Alex, we know you, but you can please introduce yourself and name and address for the record.
Mike Alex, S110W23450, County Line Drive, technically Waterford. First, thank you for the opportunity to discuss this. I want to acknowledge the time and work the board, commission, and zoning administrator have done to draft the proposed language. I also want to say that my comments are not that of a Monday morning quarterback calling that work into question, but instead as a resident who has professional experience working with zoning code in neighboring communities, as well as the Village of Vernon Code as it stands itself. I come with the questions and comments similar to those raised by you as commissioners throughout the code rewrite process, which I have watched whether in real time or recorded on YouTube. I would have appreciated being a part of the discussion as a member of the commission prior to the public comment time, but that was not allowed to this point, but hopefully that can change. In general, I have concern with the transition of authority from the village board, which is accountable as elected officials, to an unelected commission. The accountability, as well as seemingly difficult ability to fill the commission as a full body, give me pause in granting them such authority. I agree that there are some decisions and therefore authority the Plan Commission should rightly be granted. But a two-step system by which a recommendation is made by the Plan Commission to the village board is a check and balance to these issues and ask why it has been eliminated in these specific circumstances. In chapter 300-8, subsection B under use regulations, unclassified uses. So what I'm doing is outlining a couple of the areas that I have questions or concerned with as far as should we really be handing this over from the board to the Plan Commission. Under the new language, determining if an unclassified use shall be permitted would fall under the sole authority of the Plan Commission, when in fact it becomes more of a general code question in my view. Reason being, any item deemed an unclassified use is then required to have zoning code language changed to match that specific use. Think back to the event barn language process. This is even more impactful because other recent code language eliminated a large swath of conditional uses that will now have to be reestablished. For example, right now a restaurant wouldn't be able to be applied for as a conditional use until restaurant code language is inserted to the code to allow it in areas other than the highly limited business districts, which in practicality don't really exist in Vernon. There is no office or industrial park or Main Street. Ask someone to point to where Vernon is and they'll probably point in the general area. As a result, we as a village are limiting services and businesses we as residents can benefit from, both as services we utilize ourselves, as well as increased tax base following smart development and the infusion of outside dollars into other Vernon ancillary businesses. Additionally, the discussion on the rural accessory building language, that kind of dovetails off of what Mr. Malarkey was stating, is of concern to me for a couple of reasons. First, it is an example of the Plan Commission having the authority to grant or deny, and also that the language itself is very vague and leaves so much to interpretation that infringes on individuals' personal property rights. In reality, this language translates into raise orders, and the raise orders is the language that you were talking about. This is up in the definition section, and so that talks about in 300-48, subsection B, declared nuisances. So the language I'm talking about under the rural accessory building is item 3 that was added, and I'll read it and kind of interject as we go. So item 3, sufficiently structurally sound to meet minimum safety requirements for proposed use. So this is subsection 3 talking about rural accessory buildings. There's a principal structure. This is an additional building on that property.
Mike, just to clarify, this is in the definitions.
In the definition, correct. Yep, subsection, item number 3, point number 3, which is added. So sufficiently structurally sound, this building or this structure has to be sufficiently structurally sound to meet minimum safety requirements for the proposed use. I'm interjecting a question here. What is a proposed use? Let's say, for instance, it's a barn that was built 150 years ago. There's a silo, there's a grain bin, there's a barn. The proposed use right now is for it to be a part of the landscape. They're not going to be filling it with grain. They're not going to be utilizing it for storage of tractors. It's a building. It's there. What is a proposed use? What if there isn't a proposed use? It's just been there for 100+ years and will remain. I understand the distinction between we want to put this grain bin into use, we want to put this into use commercially. If it's private use, I don't know why we're starting to, for lack of a better word, stick our nose into it. And then continuing on the language, the building owner shall demonstrate to the reasonable satisfaction of the Plan Commission, again, my interjection, this is a rather ambiguous and subjective wording, to reasonable satisfaction of the Plan Commission. If I were coming before them, I would need to know something more, what's reasonable and satisfactory to you. And then returning to the language, in the form of a stamped report from a structural engineer licensed by the state of Wisconsin, that the building is sufficiently structurally sound. Again, this is putting the burden of proof on the property owner to say, you need to prove to us that this is sufficient for, again, this proposed use. If it's just going to be on my property, I don't understand why the village is now coming in and saying, well, ultimately it turns into a raise order. Continuing on, is this the proposed use for it to remain upright? Is it to be as it was originally intended to be used, or is it to be used however I want it to be? In the event of any question of structural integrity by the building inspector, so this is, again, sorry, returning back to the language. In the event of any question of structural integrity by the building inspector, my interjection, what could cause this concern? Could it be driving down the street, going to another property? Could it be trying to do an inspection on another part of that property? Is it a neighbor calling in and saying, hey, they've got this, chicken coop around the corner. Have you ever seen that? It's about to fall over. What is the intent of adding this language? Not that the intent would be there on the part of the current building inspector to do that per se, but adding this language to the rural accessory building definition, if it wasn't meant to be a point of emphasis, I don't know why we would. We have that language already in the code. I would also call into question the agricultural history of the state and statutory language that carves out agricultural buildings as exempt from much of the zoning and building code unless you put it into commercial use. That means if it's for your private use, in large parts of state statute, it's hands-off. You don't pull permits. Sean, can you speak to that as far as pulling a permit for doing work in, on, or around an agricultural building? It's very hands-off from a...
I'm not an expert on that. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, and so that would be something I think would be worth looking into, before this would be approved. And ultimately, as I said before, it basically translates into a raise order, and that language already exists. And then returning to what that all started with is giving these powers to the Plan Commission, again, which is unelected and therefore unaccountable, as well as proven difficult to fill the seats of, is concerning to me. Also, how are we as a village going to move forward from a zoning code perspective, understanding the current work and living environments? We kind of started to talk about that towards the end. Couple of specific areas of the code. Home occupation. Again, this is kind of it works between the definitions and throughout the rest of the code. Home occupation, I would consider this office work done at home. How many people right now are practicing home occupation? There is no home occupation permit. You can't go on to the village website and say, oh, I want to start my home occupation. It's just understood that you're allowed to be able to do it until somebody calls it into question. There aren't even known guidelines for residents to understand that such a scenario exists. It's only when someone calls it into question that does. And I don't think a don't ask, don't tell policy is sufficient from a zoning perspective. A couple of questions that I have about this. What about work from home teleconferencing jobs? It talks about having employees. If you have an employee who's a virtual assistant, someone could look at that and say, well, you have an employee, but no, they're not coming to the property. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about zoning code, property, what's happening at that property. How many home occupations are allowed for a single residence? Can 2 occupants be working from home? We have a carve-out that says you can allot 20% of your home's floor area to home occupation. If 2 people work, is the cumulative between the 2 of them 20%? Is it 40%? Nobody's thought of these, as issues. We're in a different landscape. And again, I don't think that who's really going to call you on it is a good way to approach it. I think we need to look at it from a worst case scenario as opposed to, hey, but people are doing it all the time, so it's not going to be an issue. Third, should there be a distinction for operations that have clients or customers come to the premises? Again, if there aren't guidelines, who would know that having their real estate clients over to their house to sign a contract could really be a technical violation of the code? I think there is oversight that's needed when you start to have, let's say you want to run a barber shop out of your basement. You're going to have clients, you're going to have people, you're going to have the public into your private residence. That's different than someone telecommuting over, Skype to be able to, sign in and talk with clients or their own staff. I think there needs to be a distinction between home occupation, someone just working from home, versus someone having the service business. And again, I think we eliminated some of that with recent code language. The next thing that kind of dovetails into that is the whole contractor's yard. I see this as a home base for off-site work. So I'm a contractor, and this is our home base. We go out and we do work, and then we come back, possibly have some office facilities there. Is the real issue site and screening, et cetera? The contractor's yard has a little bit more of a geared towards maybe a landscaping. I know we have a separate landscaping conditional use, but it's talking about storage of materials. And again, this seems to be in minutia until you start to look at the actual scenarios. Let's say I'm a contractor, I'm a general contractor, I'm a solo operation. I go and I project manage, properties. I have a home office, it's less than 20%. Yay, I'm a home occupation. Let's say that I have an employee, a staff member. Am I still under that home occupation? Do I need a conditional use? Let's say I have a truck that has lettering on it. Is that a commercial truck now that I need to have special conditional use privileges to be able to park that on my private residence? I don't know if anybody would really know, and it's one of those things, well, no, most of the time it doesn't get called into question. What if my business expands, so I have a trailer? Sometimes I use it for personal use, sometimes I use it for commercial use. Am I allowed to park that on my property? If it's on an improved surface, if it's licensed, insured? Again, all of these things, I think, need to either be addressed or at least considered when we do have language that talks about things like home occupations, and then we limit the ability for things like contractors' yards. Another one is the limited family business. This was kind of eliminated from the current part of the code, and I asked why it would be eliminated. Let's give another example. I'm not the landscaper now, I'm the Etsy shop. How many people are, able to have e-commerce businesses where, is it a home occupation? I do it from home, check. I have a Cricut cutter where I'm able to make custom signs. Am I a manufacturing operation now? I could see a village attorney that might say, you're an industrial, operation. To me, as a common sense person, I say, no, she's, I shouldn't say she, this person is operating basically what is a hobby that she gets paid for. Where does it go between an occupation and a hobby? Obviously, transfer of goods as well as payment, remuneration we like to use in our code. How do we address something like that? Is that a manufacturing operation? I've listened to Plan Commission meetings from way back when interpretations are, if you host a class at a commercial building, all of a sudden now you have to be considered an institution or a school. I think we need to clarify that, whether it be clarify it to ourselves, the public, or with our council to be able to know how we can apply these in a changing landscape. In general, I think this work from home aspect of zoning needs to be more clearly addressed and not swept under the rug of we only know if it becomes a problem, both because I think it serves our current residents, but also positions us well to allow for growth and value of property throughout Vernon. A distinction between a property with the primary use as a residence with an ancillary or conditional use with commercial components is something I think Vernon needs to capitalize on, both because of where and how we are positioned geographically, as well as spatially with so much vacant potential. To have owner-occupied and small business owner residents, in my mind, is a necessary component of a sustainable future. We can't take the approach of becoming a village and then building a large wall at the border and effectively freeze the rest of the village in time as it sat in 2020. The final code language point I would like to make is with respect to the wetland setback. We currently say no improvements within 75 feet, which is much stricter than neighboring municipalities. I don't know if that was looked at all or has ever been discussed. Muskego, for instance, has 15-foot setback. New Berlin, Mugwanago, 20-foot. Racine, depending, has even less. And most have a high watermark setback of 50 feet, while ours doesn't distinguish between high-quality wetlands or those simply platted because of poor grading. A wetland means a lot of things. People hear wetland and preserving wetland, and they think this is, the Vernon Marsh. This is some navigable waterway. I've seen plats and wetland delineations that show a stormwater culvert that you put in for the purpose of storing stormwater now being deemed a wetland because they have their strict guidelines that say if there's a cattail in it, if there's standing water in it, now it's a wetland. I think we need to revisit that, especially when we have something as strict as a 75-foot setback for that. And I think trying to make us, for lack of a word, competitive with our neighbors is something that we have to look into. Finally, in addition to laying out the rules that need to be followed, the code defines how the policy and procedure by which they are implemented. Specifically, I would like to know where in the code the policy and procedure for items such as application dissemination and fact-finding parameters is discussed. Questions I have asked ad nauseum over the last 2+ years but never received an answer to still stand. At what point are the application materials presented to boards or commissioners? While I don't believe materials should be sent immediately to the board and commission upon receipt as they are to the zoning administrator, I do believe that once any questions have been addressed during the necessary back and forth between the zoning administrator and applicant, They should be provided to commissioners and board members as a whole. Once the zoning administrator is satisfied with the technical requirements of an application being met, it should be put on an agenda and materials released. In addition, in reading the application material requirements, I think some thought needs to be put into, in practice, I don't think we require everything that it says we technically should, which I agree with because I think that's common practice. For instance, under our application requirements, it talks about having state-approved plans for any, building permitting. To require an applicant who's, doing this as a preliminary item to say, hey, can I even possibly have this use, but have them all the way go through the expense and time of state plan review, which is required through Vernon because we don't do our own review, is a big cost and a hindrance. And in addition to plan review, state plan review, we have items in there talking about stormwater requirements and showing intervals on grading plans and all of this detail that if you're in a meeting, a conditional use meeting, a site plan of operation meeting, and they say, well, what if we move the parking 5 feet to the left? All of a sudden, you've taken all of that engineering and you throw it out. When you're at the preliminary stage, you put conditions on those approvals. And as I said, as a practice, I believe that we are, going about it correctly. But I think we need to clean up the code language to be able to say, rather than a shall, it'll be a may, or as required. There are some developments where it's, it's not even worth talking about it unless you're talking about more of the details of, let's say, a grading plan or an elevation. Whereas others, to say that you always have to have this elevation, that elevation, stormwater management plans, grading plans, as a blanket requirement, I think is a little bit far-reaching. Again, if our mentality or thought process is we want to work with and for our residents and allow for, development where and when and how we see fit. Next question would be, what does a public hearing trigger? What I'm driving at there is for something such as a conditional use or any time that there's a public hearing. I was at a quarterly staff meeting back in early 2021 where this was discussed, and it was agreed upon, or being in the audience, it sounded like it was agreed upon that upon a public hearing being scheduled, just like there's a level 2 notice, as far as that's when we went from 300, I think, to 500 feet to all neighboring parcels, that a sign would be put on the property. I think that's a really good practice. Who opens snail mail? Who knows who gets the mail or where it gets forwarded to? But anybody who is impacted by that is going to drive by it. And if you don't drive by it, you're probably not going to care about it. So I thought, hey, that's a really good thing. I suggested it myself, and I thought I've seen in other municipalities. I don't know if that's being practiced now. If it is, when it was implemented, same thing that I went back to that policy and procedure. Maybe I missed it within our code language here. I thought I went somewhat exhaustively through it, but I would like to see it, just like it talks about the requirements of a Class 2 notice, to be included with this change. This kind of leads to that next part that Attorney Macy would probably talk about, is the point of concern is that ex parte contact. I don't think it's prudent to hear a zoning and land use question or be at a meeting and not have been to the site. I think Mr. Nowak mentioned before, well, we're not going to go out to the property and determine if it's raise-worthy or not, which I agree that I think that's someone else would be the one to designate that. But I also think if we're going to talk about how a building or a use or whatever it might be impacts neighbors, that we have to have physically seen the site. We have to have looked at it. And that doesn't require talking with people or get as simple as driving by. I think we need to, not that we're going to have in our code that says every commissioner or board member needs to do a drive-by of a property, but I think that should be understood from a policy and procedure standpoint, where we need to suggest that that be done, because I don't think using Google aerial or street view images to make determinations on properties of what is going to work or not work is really prudent. Maybe if it's a, backwoods part of a property, that's the only option that we have. But I've seen, whether in person or online watching, that is the sole exposure that people who are deciding up or down, is it an impact or is it not, are using to make those determinations. I don't think that that's prudent. What we have to realize is that in drafting this language, you need to be sure that you are accomplishing the goal you set out for. As we have seen and I witnessed, intent doesn't matter. Language does. If these are areas of the code that are, if there are areas of this code that were drafted with a particular intent, but could be viewed or better yet misconstrued as an expansion of the police powers of the village, we need to view them as such. Just as much as needing to view the idea of land use and planning from 30,000 feet with the whole picture in view, so too do we need to view the code. Just as I believe Vernon needs a new, clearer version of what development could and should look like in the form of a dynamic, comprehensive plan, I'll interject myself. I don't know if anybody has looked when our last comprehensive plan. So the comprehensive plan says, you know, it's a forward-thinking document that's looking towards 2026. We're now in 2023. It was drafted in 2007 and then amended, you know, with regards to Big Bend in 2012. So that's no longer forward-thinking. It's, you know, it's not even current to today. So I think that's something that needs to be looked at. So too does our zoning code need to be crafted in a way to carry it out through preserved personal property rights and limited yet guiding principles regarding overarching ideas of visual, sound nuisance, and spatial requirements and constraints, understanding that it is always a give and take between individual property owners' rights. And finally, once the comprehensive plan is understood, in my mind, that's something that needs to happen before you can draft something to implement it. Once the comprehensive plan is understood, then the code language can be crafted to facilitate that, which in turn will allow for an objective administration of it and a smart growth plan that adapts to current land uses and needs, increasing the value and quality of life of Vernon hand in hand. Thanks.
Thank you for those comments. Next up. No. Okay. People here have had a chance to have public comments. As far as Plan Commission and Village Board members, if you want to bring up something now, or as I've suggested, due to what I said before about the draft and what's posted and all of that, I know we've been working on this a long time, and I wanted to get to if we could, get to the finish line, that is adopting these things tonight. In my view anyway, I think we should adjourn this public hearing. Don't close it, adjourn it to February 8th, 2023 at 7 p.m. at Vernon Hall here to allow the posting of the December 15th draft to the internet and or to the website, sorry, and to make it available to, residents and others who are interested in the changes. And I just, as far as transparency and the way we do things in Vernon, I want to make sure the residents know and know what's in this code. As to the comments we've heard tonight, certainly the public is invited. People here are invited back in February. That's no problem. On our agenda later on, which we'll have to, as soon as we adjourn this, seems most of our agenda will be tabled then until February, but there is spots on the agenda to discuss changes based on public comments to what has been proposed. So, Sean, in the meantime, in the next month, we can take a look at some of the issues that are raised here tonight. But I'll take a quick poll before I make a motion. Jim, do you concur with? Yes. Yes. Okay, so we'll make a motion now. I'm just thinking out loud, do we do it, Plan Commission motion? Well, I suppose Plan Commission could make a motion. I'll make a motion for the Plan Commission to recommend to the board to adjourn the February 8th, or adjourn tonight's public hearing to February 8, 2023, our next Plan Commission meeting at 7 p.m. at the Vernon Village Hall. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Any discussion by Plan Commission? All in favor of the Plan Commission? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Now the board, I'll make a motion to adjourn, not close, but adjourn the public hearing tonight to February 8th, 2023 at 7 PM at the Vernon Village Hall pursuant to the Plan Commission recommendation.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, motion carries. With that, the public hearing is adjourned until February 8th, 2023. And with that, I will make a motion to table items 6, 7, and 8 until, table or postpone, whichever is the right word there, until February 8th, to put them on the agenda for February 8th, 2023. Is there I suppose we got to do this. Well, let's just see. Let me back up. I think I'll do this in two different motions for number 6. I'll make a motion on behalf of the Plan Commission to table item 6 until February 8th, 2023. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Then I'll make a motion for the board to table agenda item 6 until February 8th, 2023. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Item 7 and 8 are village board, so I'll make a motion for the village board to table items 7 and 8 on the agenda to February 8th, 2023.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We're down to number 9, Village President's Report. I know Administrator Calder had a meeting with McWanago Administrator on the Hein Newman proposed development, mostly about how that development was going to proceed. I think the Newman people still want to proceed with it, number one, and otherwise, there isn't much to add other than it was very preliminary and get together and make sure that the communities were talking to one another. Anything, I don't know how much to add there.
No, it's just formalities and essentially how the two communities work together to see this development move forward. Should Newman Developments continue to desire to move it forward.
For the benefit of the public, this is the proposed development on the Hein property, which abuts Edgewood Avenue, close to the village of McWanago. And it's basically at not the corner, but close to the intersection of Edgewood and National Avenue,
Which is the old golf course.
which is
property.
the old, golf course or driving range was in there. Items B on my report, set meeting dates, checklist, those are on hold. We're going to tackle those when we have the occasion and the time to go through the checklist for development and the model developers agreement. Letter D is on there, I don't think there's any update there at all, Sean, on the conditional use permits. We've got a massive list at a meeting or two ago. So moving on to number 10, minutes. I have not had a chance to look at these, so I don't know. These were just passed out tonight. And so I was going to make a motion to table on behalf of the Plan Commission, unless Plan Commissioners have read them and think they're okay. I didn't have a chance to read them. So let's just table them until February 8th, 2023. I'll make that motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Yep. Unanimous.
Unanimous. I'll make a similar motion to table the December 14th, 2022 minutes for the board until February 8th, 2023. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Make a motion to adjourn the Plan Commission.
You made the motion or?
I'll make the motion.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, Plan Commission?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Plan Commission's adjourned. Similar motion to adjourn for the Village Board.
I'll second that motion.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned. Village Board's adjourned. Thank you, members of the public, for coming.